Welcome to Dark Knight Films Reviews and another Versus Night. Tonight we will be comparing Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier from 1955 versus The Last Command from 1955. Alright, so let's begin this one with the leads. Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier stars Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen. The Last Command stars Sterling Hayden and Ernest Borgnine. Now, these two films are about historical figures that took place in the Alamo. Fess Parker is, of course, playing Davy Crockett, while Sterling Hayden in The Last Command is playing Jim Bowie. So, both of their performances are pretty good at playing the characters. Of course, Fess Parker is playing Davy Crockett in a Disney production where it's more family-oriented and it's trying to appeal to kids. Whereas Sterling Hayden is playing Jim Bowie in The Last Command in a much more realistic based film that is trying really hard to be historically accurate, and it does. As I will get when I will get to story, I'll get to that. But Jim Bowie character is well played by Sterling Hayden in this film. One negative I have about Fess Parker as Davy Crockett is that at the time of this film, he was 29 years old. And they don't do anything to make him look like he ages at all throughout the film. So by the time he gets to the Alamo, when the real Davy Crockett was 49, he was about to be 50 years old. He doesn't look like he's any older. He still looks like this 29-year-old guy. And that's an issue with a Disney film. A Disney film is not going to try to make things look more realistic and everything. They're just worried about getting it out there for kids because, you know, they know that a kid will enjoy watching Davy Crockett. So, it worked for Disney. I mean, the film was hugely successful, and Fess Parker became, kids' favorite character with the character of Davy Crockett. But it's not historically accurate. I mean, just take a look at me. When I was 29 years old, I didn't look like I do now when I'm 50. So, it's not realistic looking to see Fess Parker fighting in Indian wars earlier in this film. Seeing this 29-year-old young guy in these sequences and then seeing him make it to the Alamo, which in reality the character should have been older, but he's not made to look like he's any older at all. Another thing between these two films is the co-leads in them. They're both, it's odd, but they are both kind of these fun sidekick characters. In Davy Crockett, you have Buddy Ebsen, who is great as always playing his character in here. Very likable. He's just as likable in this as he ever was in the Beverly Hillbillies or playing Barnaby Jones. So in Last Command, yes, the film is a more dramatic and serious film, but Ernest Borgnine plays the character that is friends with Sterling Hayden. And they don't start out that way. They start off enemies, as he doesn't agree with Jim Bowie's thoughts on Texas and Mexico. So they have this knife fight early in the film. And so he ends up becoming this really close, confident friend to Jim Bowie in there. And I just think that works. You know, Buddy Ebsen's character is, from the get-go, he is the best friend to Davy, and he's just there for him, you know. So, this is a pretty easy one for me. I'm going to go with The Last Command on this one, because I just think Sterling Hayden and Ernest Borgnine were just much more serious versions of the character, and it just made the story that much better with those characters. All right, so let's move on to supporting. The supporting cast in Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, consists of Don McGowan, Kenneth Tobey, William Bakewell, Basil Roosdale, Pat Hogan, Mike Mazurki, and Helene Stanley. Now, the supporting cast for The Last Command consists of Richard Carlson, Arthur Honeycutt, J. Carroll Nash, Ben Cooper, John Russell, Anna Marie Alberghetti, and Virginia Gray. All right, so let's compare these with historical figure versus historical figure in this. So, in Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, William Barrett Travis is played by Don McGowan, who does a really great job as the character. The problem with it is we don't see William Barrett Travis until Davy Crockett ends up going to the Alamo, because Davy Crockett was not a character that was there from when the turmoil leading up to the Alamo happened. So we're not seeing any of the stuff that Travis was doing. So there's not as much tension and there's not as much character development for the character. He plays him well while he's on screen, but in The Last Command, Richard Carlson plays William Barrett Travis, and he is in a lot of the film because Jim Bowie was involved in a lot of the conflict leading up to the Alamo. So between those two, it's an easy win here for Richard Carlson. Now let's move on to another one of the supporting characters. This time, actors playing characters from each of these films that are leads in the other films. So in Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, we have Kenneth Tobey playing Jim Bowie. And very similar to Don McGowan, you know, I mean, Kenneth Tobey plays Bowie as good as he can, but we know nothing about him until these last, I'd say 30 minutes of the film, when Davy Crockett finally arrives at the Alamo. Whereas Arthur Honeycutt in The Last Command is playing Davy Crockett, and he shows up within the last maybe 40 minutes of the movie, because I think more of The Last Command takes place at the Alamo than Davy Crockett does. And Arthur Honeycutt's portrayal of Davy Crockett beats the hell out of Fess Parker's. he makes him this fun guy that, he talks about how he went to Congress and all this stuff, and he's just so good with his delivery of his lines. I've always loved Arthur Honeycutt. He's just got that attitude and that style about him that fits the Davy Crockett character well. And he looks the age of the character that he would have been at the time that he's at the Alamo. So there's two right there that I think are highly superior to Davy Crockett. Whereas The Last Command has the character of Santa Anna, which we don't even see in Davy Crockett at all in there, as played by J. Carrol Naish. And J. Carrol Naish plays the character and gives him such character that it is, and because of the connection between him and Sterling Hayden's character of Jim Bowie, them actually being close before this Mexican Texican conflict actually happened, that it makes him a believable, historically accurate kind of a representation of the character. And the same thing goes with the females in between the two films. Now, there's two in Last Command. There's only technically one in Davy Crockett, and that is Elaine Stanley playing Davy Crockett's wife. Now, with The Last Command, you have Anna Marie Alberghetti and you have Virginia Gray. And both of them play excellently in their roles in The Last Command. Not that I'm saying that Stanley doesn't do well as Fess Parker's wife character in Davy Crockett. But it's just, as I said, she probably gets a little bit more to do throughout the film when you're seeing Crockett with his wife and everything in scenes, whether it's after the Indian Wars, before he goes to Congress, before he goes to the Alamo, all of that, So, but I think the supporting cast in The Last Command is superior. So, yeah, I'm going to go with The Last Command on supporting. So, let's move on to the story. Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, follows Davy Crockett as he fights in the Creek Indian Wars, goes to Congress, and heads to the Alamo. The Last Command follows Jim Bowie as he discovers an uneasy dispute with the Mexican government with the Texians, attempts to talk down Santa Anna, but ends up fighting in the Alamo. Now, as I said before, I think something that hurts Davy Crockett is the fact that it was 3 episodes of a miniseries that Disney did for television that were edited together and made for release on the big screen. And it shows, because you have basically, other than Buddy Ebsen being in each segment that he's in, and of course Fess Parker, the Indian Wars sequence has its own cast, its own people working alongside Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen, and then you have the Congress scenes, which have, again, different actors working off of them, and then you get to the Alamo, which has different actors working off them. And for me, um, it doesn't make it as interesting of a storyline. Yes, it is following Davy Crockett in his little adventures, if you will. But for this comparison, I am going historical. And for me, a film that is doing these kind of things, it needs to be, I expect embellishments for motion picture sake. But with Disney on Davy Crockett, it is, like I said before, with the performances and everything on the leads, it's too much aimed at children. And even though, yes, it does get to the Alamo sequences, and they do have people dying, and in the Indian Wars sequences, they have people dying. But it is not put in a context and made in a way. It's made, like Disney style, where, you'll have people dying in it, but they're not lingering on that moment. They're not making it very, intense and everything. Whereas in The Last Command, you get the gist of the Mexican-Texian conflict that is going on right from the start of the film, because you got Jim Bowie is right in the middle of it, and he is trying to be the voice of reason, and it's not working on either side. He tries to talk to both Travis and Austin, and and try to get them to just cooler heads prevail kind of thing. And then he ends up going to Santa Anna and tries to tell him to, drop this conflict and everything, because they are friends. And, of course, Santa Anna at this point is in his very Napoleonic thing, where he's just, no, I'm gonna do this, and thinking that he knows best. And it forces Jim Bowie to, actually stand alongside his people that he's become close to and friends with, and even someone who he clashes with, like William Barrett Travis, in there. And it just, I want to beat a dead horse with this, but the acting, with this supporting, but I just think the story on The Last Command is just done better, because it does try to focus more on the historical facts and tries to make a more realistic film. So I'm going to go with The Last Command on story. All right, now let's move on to a special category. Yes, I'm going to cover direction, but we're also going to cover, in this segment, we are going to cover the song and direction. The song in Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, is the Ballad of Davy Crockett, as performed by the Wellingtons. The song in The Last Command is Jim Bowie, as performed by Gordon MacRae. And both of the songs are very, very catchy tunes, even though, the Ballad of Davy Crockett is the much more popular and more well-known song. If you were to listen to and hear both of these songs, next to each other, which I'm going to do for you right now, let's hear a little bit of the Ballad of Davy Crockett.
Davy, Davy. Crockett, king of the wild frontier.
Now let's hear a little bit of Jim Bowie.
What a man was 6'6" Jim Bowie.
Very iconic songs in both respects, even though The Last Command is not as well known today as what Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier is. I think both songs are pretty equally good for the films that they are related to. But I did want to cover the songs in this between the two films, because they are, in my opinion, both very, very good songs. So let's go ahead and look at our directors. Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier was directed by Norman Foster. The Last Command was directed by Frank Lloyd. Now, Norman Foster directs Davy Crockett in a very episodic manner, of course, because, like I said, it was a TV miniseries prior to being made into this feature film. And he does a pretty good job with, Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen in making their characters evolve from those Indian War scenes into their Congress scenes and all the way into the Alamo sequences. But all other characters in it suffer because of the episodic nature of the way that he puts the film together. And it's not, that's not a knock against Norman as a director, because, this was not intended to be a feature film. Now, if we were just comparing the last, 30, 40 minutes or whatever of Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, which took place at the Alamo, with The Last Command, it might be a different story. So, it's quite simple to me which one of these films to me is the better film, even though I love both of them. But Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, is better viewed as that TV series, that TV miniseries, where it is the actual full episodes as individual stories. I mean, you can watch, as you're watching the show, you are watching the parts where he's in the Indian War scenes, and then you can end up going into the next episode and watching it, and it has a more organic feel as a television series. But when you combine these things together and join them together, making it into a feature film, and the only cohesive thing between each episode that connects them is Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen, it just makes it too episodic. Whereas The Last Command was a feature film made for the big screen from the get-go. And it's apparent with the way that Frank Lloyd puts this film together. He has a very consistent idea of where it's going to start, with Jim Bowie coming along and seeing the conflict that is going on between Mexico and Texas. And then he leads us into, the meeting of Ernest Borgnine and him eventually becoming friends with Bowie. And then he leads us into Sterling Hayden's Jim Bowie going home, or attempting to go home, and being stopped by the Mexican government looking like he's getting arrested. But it turns out Santa Anna wanted to talk to him in person. Number one, he's wanting to meet with him because he's informing him that Bowie's wife and child died. And at that moment, the character of Jim Bowie becomes even more interesting to us because we see how broken and hurt he is by this event. But the conflict with Mexico and Texas is still going on, and it forces him to deal with what he's suffering, with this heartache, and moving forward and trying to help his fellow Texians to defend the Alamo. So, yeah. This is an easy win for me all around the board for The Last Command against Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, which is a more well-known product due to it being a Disney film. But in my opinion, The Last Command is the superior film. But what do you guys think? Have you seen these two films? Do you agree with my review? Do you disagree? Let me know in those comments down below. And, as usual, if you enjoyed this video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to click that bell icon so you can be notified about future videos just like this one. And while you're by the subscribe button, do not forget to click that join button and become a Dark Knight fan. Well, that's the end of another Versus Night. If you missed last week's Versus Night, check out the link up in here. Or if you've missed any of the other Versus Nights, check out our playlist and see anything that you have missed.